I'm Margaret Hale, 61 years old, a retired high school teacher from Boston, and a widow for nearly a decade. I thought I had endured enough humiliations in my life, but nothing prepared me for what happened at my son's wedding. The ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers and polished marble. Yet, when the maitre guided me toward my seat, I was not led to the front with family or even tucked discreetly among cousins. I was shown to a tiny round table, pressed against the kitchen doors where servers rushed in and out with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Every time the doors swung open, a burst of steam and chatter hit my back. Vanessa, the bride, placed a manicured hand on my shoulder and whispered, "This will keep the photographs neat. Hope you understand." Then she floated away in her satin gown, leaving me staring at the chipped paint on the swinging door. For a moment I sat frozen, cheeks burning, wondering if Andrew, my only son, had seen what his bride had done, but his smile was trained on the camera, his arm wrapped around her waist, his eyes oblivious to the mother he'd pushed into the shadows. I looked at the silver-wrapped box I had carried so carefully to the reception. Inside were two things: the deed to a Boston penthouse worth $3 million and a cashier's check for $4 million more. I had imagined them unwrapping it with gasps, surrounded by applause, a grand gesture of love and legacy. Instead, I rose quietly, smoothed my dress, and slipped the box back into my purse. My heart pounded, not from shame anymore, but from clarity. If this was where they wanted me, beside the kitchen door, out of sight, then I knew exactly what I had to do. I walked out of that ballroom, heels clicking against marble, past guests who barely noticed. In that moment, I realized something sharper than grief. Money can buy property, but it cannot purchase respect. And if my own son would not guard my dignity, I would guard it myself. I drove home from the hotel in silence, the silver box heavy in the passenger seat beside me. My phone buzzed again and again. First Andrew, then Vanessa, then an unknown number I assumed was hers. I let it ring, watching their names flash across the screen until finally I slid the phone into the glove compartment and shut it like a coffin lid. The house was dark when I arrived. The porch light had burned out weeks ago, and I never got around to replacing it. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of cedar, from the old chest my husband once built. I set the box on the coffee table and lowered myself into his armchair, the one piece of furniture I'd never been able to give away. For years, I had imagined this night differently. Andrew beaming, me holding a glass of champagne. The family gathered close. Instead, I sat alone, listening to the tick of the clock, wondering when exactly my love had turned into something they could measure in dollars. The doorbell rang. It startled me enough that I clutched the box to my chest. Before opening the door, Clara stood there, bundled in her wool coat, cheeks red from the night air. She had been my neighbor for 20 years, the kind of friend who notices when you forget your trash day or when your hydrangeas need trimming. "I thought you might need company," she said softly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes fell to the box on the table. "That's what you meant to give them, isn't it?" I nodded, throat tight. She rested a hand on mine. "Then you did the right thing, taking it back." Her words settled like a stone in still water. For the first time that night, I let myself breathe, but the phone would ring again, and I already knew what they were after. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds, but I felt no warmth. My phone lit up with a string of new messages. Vanessa's words were syrupy at first. We're so sorry for yesterday. Can we meet soon? Then quickly shifted. It might be easier if you sign some papers, so we can help manage the property. Andrew followed with an email that read, more like a business proposal than a son reaching out to his mother. He spoke of consolidating assets, streamlining paperwork, and one phrase that made my chest tighten. Power of attorney. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. It wasn't grief anymore. It was recognition. This wasn't about mending hurt feelings or repairing family bonds. This was about access. Access to me, to what I owned, to what I had quietly saved after years of sacrifice. Clara stopped by with muffins from the bakery down the street. I showed her the messages, each one colder than the last. She shook her head. Margaret, they're circling you like hawks. Don't wait until they swoop. Her warning echoed through me long after she left. I remembered the way Vanessa had touched my shoulder at the wedding. Her voice too sweet, her eyes already searching the room for the next camera angle. That evening, I searched online for a private investigator. One name stood out. Julia Brooks, a retired Boston detective known for her discretion. I dialed the number before doubt could stop me. Her voice was steady, professional. Tell me what you're afraid of, Mrs. Hale. I told her everything. The kitchen door, the box, the messages. By the time I hung up, she had already promised to start digging. Somewhere in my gut, I knew what she would find. But I also knew I needed proof. 3 days later, Julia arrived at my house, carrying a slim folder tucked under her arm. She didn't waste time with small talk. She opened the folder on my kitchen table and slid a series of printouts toward me. Credit card debt, she said, tapping the first sheet. Nearly $80,000 between them. Student loans still unpaid. And here, she placed another paper on top. Records of consultations with a family attorney. They asked about your estate, how to accelerate inheritance. They even inquired about power of attorney. The words pressed on me like a physical weight. Julia's tone was calm, but each revelation cut deeper. She flipped to a final page. Blurry photographs of me leaving the grocery store, me unlocking my front door. They hired someone to tail you last week. I traced the payment back to Vanessa's account. My stomach turned. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't paranoia. Then it was strategy. I drifted toward the window, staring at the small garden Harold once tended, remembering the years we pinched pennies just to pay Andrew's tuition. I had packed lunches into brown paper bags, graded essays until midnight, put off buying new shoes so he could have cleats for soccer. Every sacrifice now twisted into mockery when set against Vanessa's designer handbags and Andrew's taste for new cars he couldn't afford. Julia closed the folder and leaned forward. Mrs. Hale, people in debt get desperate. You need to be careful. I met her eyes. My voice steadier than I felt. Careful is no longer enough. I need to be ready. As she left, the house felt different. Smaller somehow, as if danger had stepped inside with me. That night, my phone lit up again. A new message, a new demand, and I knew the storm was just beginning. It was close to midnight when the message arrived. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, jolting me Awake. Vanessa's words glared from the screen. Andrew's in the ER. They need your signature right away. Please come. My heart lurched. Despite everything Julia had told me, the thought of my son lying helpless in a hospital bed stripped away reason. I pulled on a coat over my nightgown, snatched my keys, and drove through the empty streets of Boston. The hospital's sliding doors hissed open, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. I hurried to the reception desk. My son, Andrew Hale, he was brought in tonight. Where is he? The clerk typed quickly, then frowned. I'm sorry, ma'am. We have no patient by that name. I shook my head. Check again. He's 28, dark hair, 6 foot tall. He must be here. She turned the screen toward me. Rows of names glowing under the fluorescent lights. Andrews wasn't among them. The chill that spread through me had nothing to do with the sterile air. I stumbled back, clutching my purse. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Come around to the side entrance. Bring your ID. I stared at the words until they blurred. Julia's warning echoed. People in debt get desperate. The truth hit with brutal clarity. Andrew and Vanessa weren't waiting with doctors. They were waiting with papers. I deleted the message without replying. Walked back through the lobby and into the night. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every red light a reminder of how close I'd come to stepping into their trap. By the time I reached my driveway, the fear had hardened into something else. Resolve. They had tried to trick me with my son's life. That meant the rules had changed. The morning after the hospital trick, I packed a single suitcase. I didn't even glance at the photo album stacked on the shelf or the quilt folded neatly across the sofa. Those belonged to another life, a life I had already outgrown. I locked the front door one last time and placed the keys in an envelope for the realtor. By noon, I was standing in the marble lobby of the penthouse tower, overlooking the Charles River. The concierge welcomed me with a practiced smile, unaware of the storm that had carried me here. I rode the elevator to the 22nd floor. The box with the deed clutched to my chest like a shield. When the doors opened, the apartment spread out before me. Walls of glass revealing the skyline. Sunlight pouring across polished wood floors, the faint hum of the city below. It was everything I had once imagined for Andrew. A place to build a future, to start a family, to live above the noise. Instead, it would be mine. I set my suitcase on the gleaming counter of the open kitchen and placed the keys beside it. The gesture felt ceremonial, as if I were staking a claim, not only on the space, but on the years I still had left. For the first time in months, I didn't hear my phone buzzing. I didn't check for messages or apologies. I simply opened the balcony doors, stepped into the crisp air, and let the city stretch out before me. The ache in my chest hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. No longer grief, no longer fear, something steadier, sharper. This penthouse was supposed to be my gift to them. Instead, it would be my sanctuary. And I knew I would never go back. The phone rang late in the evening, the city lights flickering against the glass walls. For a long moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but the screen showed Andrew's name, and some part of me still ached to hear his voice. "Mom," he said quickly, almost breathless. I know things have been tense. I heard something about a gift. You planned and Vanessa and I. We're scared we'd missed our chance. That's why we acted the way we did. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tighter to my ear, scared of missing a gift. I repeated, the words sour on my tongue. That's what frightened you? Not losing me, not losing the bond we had, but missing a payday? He was silent, then softer. I didn't mean it like that. I just were under pressure. You don't understand how hard it is. I looked around the penthouse, the city sprawling like a constellation beneath me. I understand. Debt, Andrew. I lived with it for decades, juggling bills while your father was sick, working late nights so you could have a chance. Don't tell me I don't understand pressure. He exhaled sharply, frustration leaking through. Then what do you want me to say? Respect, I answered simply. Respect is the real inheritance. Without it, no amount of property or money means anything. The line went quiet except for the faint hum of traffic on his end. My throat tightened, but my voice held steady. I love you, Andrew. That hasn't changed. But this door, this life, it only opens for honesty. If you come with spreadsheets and schemes, it will stay shut. I ended the call before he could reply. My hand trembled, but my heart had never felt clearer. 2 days passed before they appeared. The concierge called up to my unit, his voice polite but uneasy. Mrs. Hale, your son and his wife are here in the lobby. They brought flowers. Should I send them up? I walked to the small screen mounted near the door. The security camera showed them standing by the marble desk. Andrew clutched a bouquet of leaves. Vanessa held a gift bag with tissue paper spilling over the edges. They looked polished, rehearsed, like actors waiting for the curtain to rise. For a long moment, I let myself stare. My son's shoulders were slumped in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy, caught in some mischief he couldn't explain. Vanessa's eyes darted constantly toward the camera above her head, as if she knew I was watching. The intercom crackled. Mom, please, just 5 minutes. We want to apologize. We want to make things right. My hand hovered over the button that would unlock the elevator. A part of me longed to believe him, to imagine that behind those words was real remorse, not strategy. But then I remembered the hospital text, the empty bed that never existed, the lies stacked higher than the flowers in his hand. I pressed the button to speak. My voice came out calm, steady. This door opens for respect, Andrew, not for greed, not for optics. Vanessa whispered something sharp I couldn't hear, and Andrew's face tightened. They stood there another minute before turning toward the exit, the bouquet drooping in his fist. I watched them leave without moving from the screen. My chest ached, but my hands felt steady. I hadn't lost my son that day. I had simply refused to lose myself. That weekend, Clara arrived with 2 women I had never met before. She didn't ask for permission, just knocked briskly and stepped in, carrying a grocery bag that smelled of garlic and fresh herbs. Margaret, she said with a grin, I thought it was time you met Helen and Marjorie. Helen was 72, her silver hair pulled into a bun, eyes sharp despite the cane she leaned on. She had spent decades as a nurse before retiring. Marjorie, 68, had a booming laugh that filled the room, though she confessed later that she lived alone in a small apartment across town after a bitter Divorce. We settled into the kitchen. Together, chopping onions, stirring sauce, setting out dishes. The penthouse, which had felt cavernous and cold, slowly warmed with the hum of conversation and the clatter of pots. As we ate, the stories came. Helen spoke of children who rarely visited, who treated her savings as a future guarantee rather than her hard-earned comfort. Marjorie described siblings who mocked her choices, calling her selfish when she refused to co-sign a loan. I listened, each word striking chords too familiar. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like an isolated mother cast aside. At a wedding, I felt part of something. An invisible sisterhood of women who had carried families on their backs only to be dismissed when the carrying was done. Clara raised her glass. Here's to making our own family, she said. We clinked glasses, the sound bright against the night air drifting in through the balcony doors. I looked around the table at these women, strangers hours ago, and felt a truth settle deep inside me. Family could be chosen, rebuilt, stitched together with respect instead of blood. The following week, I sat in a conference room across from Thomas Reed, a lawyer whose calm voice carried the weight of decades in practice. Papers lay neatly stacked before us, heavy with clauses and signatures. On the top sheet, bold letters read, "The Beacon Fund Incorporated, this will establish your nonprofit," Thomas explained, adjusting his glasses. "We'll file for the EIN. Draft bylaws, appoint a board of 3. With your approval, Clara, Helen, and Marjorie can serve as founding members. From there, you'll be free to provide grants, legal clinics, whatever programs you see fit." I traced the letters with my finger. For so long, paperwork had been the battlefield, deeds, checks, signatures wielded against me like bait. But here, the paper felt different. It wasn't a trap. It was a shield. We discussed details. Micro grants for women cornered by family debt. A helpline staffed by volunteers. Partnerships with local legal clinics. Practical steps, not just lofty ideas. I wanted this fund to outlive my anger, to become something tangible, something that could not be undone by greed. When the moment came to sign, my hand didn't tremble. I pressed the pen firmly against the page, each stroke an act of reclamation. My voice was steady as I said, "This isn't about revenge. It's about making sure women like us are never left defenseless." Thomas nodded, sliding the papers into a leather folder. "Then today, Mrs. Hale, you've built something that matters." As I left his office, the city bustled around me, but the noise felt distant. What echoed in my chest was a new certainty. Respect may not be written into family vows, but it could be carved into law, into structure, into paper. That could not be ignored. That evening, I sat on the balcony of the penthouse, the city glittering below like a sea of lanterns. The Charles River caught the last traces of daylight, and for the first time in years, I felt no urge to look over my shoulder. The papers were signed. The fund was real. And so was the strength that had carried me here. I thought of Andrew. Somewhere in the city. He was probably telling himself that he had meant well. That desperation excused deception. I wanted to believe he might still grow into the man I had once prayed he'd be. My love for him hadn't vanished. It pulsed quietly, the way a scar still aches when the rain comes. But love is not a blank check, and motherhood is not consent to be used. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the night air. Money can build walls, but only respect builds bridges. That was the lesson I wished he had learned at the wedding. Instead, he had shown me another truth. Sometimes the only way to keep love alive is to place a boundary around it. Inside, Clara, Helen, and Marjorie clinked glasses in the kitchen, laughter carrying down the hallway. They weren't bound to me by blood or history. Yet, their presence filled the rooms more fully than any banquet hall ever could. I joined them, lifting my glass high. The crystal chimed, and I felt the sound settle deep in my chest. This wasn't the family I had once imagined, but it was the family I had built, the family that chose me as much as I chose them. As the night stretched on, one truth rose above the city lights. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning back what was taken, but having the courage to say no. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.